Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week I'm joined by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, Dr. Glenn Livingston is a veteran psychologist who's also been the CEO of several companies, and he has written a book called Never Binge Again, which has sold over 600,000 copies. Now, the chat primarily focuses on his book. It speaks about his weight loss journey, what led him to sort of look into this a lot more, and how one can change their mindset in a brief summary of the book, as well as just some other questions I had regarding today's society with advertising and exercise and all these sort of things that kind of factor into sort of trying to lose weight in today. Now, the chat was over Skype, so there is a small amount of latency delay. I think I've sort of sorted out in post-production primarily, but there is a little bit of that delay, so if there are long pauses, I do apologise for that. Also, this is the first one I've done over Skype where I've actually recorded as well as in video, so if you go onto YouTube, you can actually watch me and him have a conversation. I will say that if you do that, or if you're listening on there right now, you will occasionally see my eyes, especially towards the end, sort of avert away. And when I rewatched it, I just wanted to sort of clarify, I have notes to the side. I'm not on my phone or texting or anything like that. I have notes to the side that I was sort of reading as he was speaking to me to make sure that the conversation kept flowing and things. I hadn't really thought about it as obviously it was being video recorded, but I just want to throw that out there just to be sure. No promo for today's show, so as soon as I've basically finished the sentence, there's going to be the intro theme and then the main thing's going to play. And if you're on YouTube, you'll see the video will start to play. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Be sure to check us out on the usual social media things. Give us a review on iTunes if you fancy it. All the sort of usual stuff. And as always, I'll be back at the end of the chat to give a bit more information on upcoming releases and whatnot. So thanks as always, guys, and I'll talk to you at the end. Today I'm joined by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Do you want me to call you Doctor or Glenn, or do you not mind?
I prefer Glenn.
Yep.
Most sometimes people call me doctor because they want to feel official or something, but I don't stand on ceremony. I prefer Glenn.
Okay, no worries at all. Yeah. Doctor. No, I'm checking. Okay, Glenn.
That's how it's going to be, huh, Mike? Okay.
That's how it starts, exactly.
Excuse me, let's turn off my phone. Go ahead.
That's fine, no worries at all. So yeah, what I was going to say is that how many of these have you done out of interest, just for my own knowledge?
200, 250.
Oh, wow. You've done a lot. I'm going to have to try and make sure I'm one of the best. Try and rank up against all the hosts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so far, you're the best looking, so that we're...
well, thank you very much. Maybe it's because the camera quality isn't that great. You can't see me that well. But yeah, I've looked you up a bit, and I've looked at some of the things you've been up to, and what was amazing, essentially, you've done a lot of things, obviously. So all the listeners won't have researched you. So let's just say, obviously, what's your PhD in? Let's start from there.
Clinical psychology. I come from a family of 17 psychologists and therapists and counselors and social workers. So the standing joke is, if something breaks, we all know how to ask it how it feels, but nobody knows how to fix it.
That's good. So
yeah, clinical psych. I was a child and family therapist originally, had a large practice on Long Island. But I also had a very difficult problem with eating myself. And frequently I wasn't able to be really present. I'd be working in really high risk situations with suicidal adolescents or a couple right after an affair, but I'd be sitting and thinking about, how do I get to the deli and dislodge my jaw between patients so I can shovel as much food as I can into my mouth. So yeah, it was a serious problem. Yeah.
So was there like a turning point in your life which was really the moment where you kind of went, okay, now I need to sort of get my health in order in a sense?
Yeah. Okay. So the story is that when I was about 17, I figured out I'm 6'4", I'm reasonably muscular. And if I worked out for 2.5 or 3 hours a day, I could eat anything I wanted to, 2 pizzas, a big box of donuts, 6 lattes, chocolate bars, you name it. Whatever I wanted to, and I was thin. And I did not think it was a problem. I thought it was great. I thought it was this great thing that I found. It's actually called exercise bulimia because you're spending an awful lot of time eating and an awful lot of time exercising, and you forget about the rest of life.
Right.
But I didn't know that at the time, and I got away with it until I was maybe 22 or so, when I went to graduate school and got married. All of a sudden, I had a lot of responsibilities. I was commuting 2 hours each way. I lived on Long Island. I went to school in the Bronx. I had a wife, I had patients, and I couldn't exercise for 2.5 or 3 hours each day, but I couldn't stop thinking about food. And I just kept eating and eating and eating. As a matter of fact, I started eating worse because of all the stress. And my triglycerides went through the roof, and the doctors were yelling at me. They were saying, "You're going to die before you're 30,
Oh
35
wow.
at best." I mean, my triglycerides were 1100 at one point, or 1126, I think was the top number. And I thought I was going to have a heart attack, around the corner, like a lot of the men in my family, but they had it later. The problem is that because I was a psychologist, everything, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
so I went the psychological route. I tried to love myself thin. I said, "Hey, Glenn, it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you." And I went to the best psychologists and nutritionists, and I went to Overeaters Anonymous, and I took medication from a psychiatrist for a little while. And I did everything that I could think of to overcome overeating myself on the theory that I could love myself thin, until I was in my early 40s, and I had a dual career. When I never had kids and I never had children, and for a lot of the time I worked at home. So I had a lot of time to work on my career, and I also did a lot of corporate consulting for Fortune 100 brands, a lot of them in the big food industry.
Yeah, I think Lipton and Kraft were two of the ones that I saw
Yeah,
named online.
yeah,
So
it was
yes,
in
proper
Kraft
big
and
companies.
Nabisco,
Yeah.
and yeah, yeah. And I knew that they were willing to pay a lot of money for these big studies that I would do. And I said, well, if these are worth so much money, why don't I do one for myself and see if I can figure this out? So in the days when internet clicks were cheap, over the course of 5 years, I got 40,000 people to take a survey. And in the survey were questions about what foods do you have trouble controlling once you start eating them? And what areas of your life are you satisfied, not satisfied, stressed, angry, etc.? And a couple of other personality variables. And I was looking for correlations. The strongest correlations I found, which were not perfect by any means, said that people who struggle with chocolate, and my binges always started with chocolate,
Mhm.
people who struggle with chocolate, they tend to be lonely or brokenhearted. People who struggle with salty, crunchy things tend to be stressed at work. And people who struggle with soft, chewy things like bagels and pasta, they tend to be stressed at home.
Okay.
So yeah, kind of makes sense in some ways.
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought I'd look at myself first, because I wasn't working with a lot of overeating clients at that time because I knew I had a problem. And I went to my mom, who was also a therapist, and I said, "Mom, I am definitely lonely and brokenhearted, and this study says that that's why I like chocolate. But can you tell me anything about my upbringing that would have set up this pattern? Why do I run to chocolate when I feel lonely or brokenhearted?" And I was in a bad marriage, so that's why I was lonely and brokenhearted.
Ah.
And my mom said, "Honey, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." But she got this horrible look on her face. "I was overwhelmed when you were an infant, when you were maybe 1.5 years old. My father, your grandfather, had just gotten out of prison, and I adored him my whole life, but I didn't know that he was guilty doing these things. And it was such a shock for me. I was so depressed. I was so depressed. The other thing that happened was that your father, my husband, was a captain in the army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. And I was terrified. I was going to be a woman without a dad and without a husband, with a single, with a small child and another one on the way. I was terrified. And half the time I would just be sitting and staring at the wall. And I didn't have the wherewithal to hold you or comfort you or even feed you healthy things when you came running to me crying. And so what I did was I got a little refrigerator, and I put it on the floor. And in the refrigerator, I put a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup. And when you came running to me, I'd say, "Glenn, go get your Bosco. Go get your Bosco." And you'd go crawling over to the chocolate syrup. You'd open the refrigerator, you'd take it out, you'd suck on the bottle, and you go into a sugar coma. And at the moment I thought, Eureka, this is it, right? And if this were the movies, then Mom and I would have a big hug and a big cry, and I would never have trouble with chocolate again, right? Well, I did have a big hug, and this was on Skype, actually, we were talking, but metaphorically we had a big hug and a big cry. I learned all sorts of things about her and her life, and I could forgive her more easily. I could forgive myself more easily. So some of the self-castigation and self-hatred went away when I learned that story. So it's a good conversation to have. But would you believe me if I told you, Mike, that the eating actually got worse?
Oh, that's surprising.
So it got worse because there was this little voice in my head that went something like this. "You know what, Glenn? You're right. Your mama didn't love you enough, and she left a big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can find a love of your life, you better go out and binge on chocolate right now. Let's go get some. It was this voice of justification. What that taught me was that it doesn't matter so much why we eat what we eat. I mean, it's interesting. You can have soulful conversations. You can learn about your past and the people in it, but it doesn't matter so much for fixing the problem. It's like trying to understand a fire rather than building a better fireplace around it to make sure it doesn't do damage. And that the holes in the fireplace that are allowing the fire to get out turn out to be that type of false logic that that justifies breaking your best laid plans. So if I were to say, I will never have chocolate on a Monday to Friday again, and then I heard a little voice in my head that said, you know, Glenn, chocolate is really from a cocoa bean and that grows on a plant. So chocolate's a vegetable, right? That's the kind of logic that allows people, it sounds really silly, but at the moment of impulse, they can do it. And it's easier, I've discovered, to recognize and disempower that false logic than it is to put out the fire or figure out where the fire was started in the first place. So you want to be more of an engineer or masonry, who would make the fireplace. You want to be more of an engineer or a mason than a psychologist or a detective. That's the first thing I discovered. Then around that time, a couple of things were going on. One was that I recognized that you couldn't really love yourself thin because the part of the brain that the food companies were spending billions of dollars to target is the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain doesn't know love. The brainstem, the back of the brain here, it really knows eat, mate, or kill. It sees something in the environment and it goes, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? There's no love there. There's no creativity or music or art or concern for family or tribe or relationships or children. There's no spirituality or religion. There's no concern for long-term plans. Just eat, mate, or kill. And it's an activation of the fight, of the very primitive fight or flight response. And that's why when people feel addicted to a food, it feels like they can't survive without it. And that's why all their best laid thinking goes out the window, because there's the reptilian brain and then there's us. This is everything that we value. And the mammalian brain and the neocortex, everything above that, evolved to be able to control the reptilian brain, dominate it in the way that we would dominate our bladders. Like you wouldn't say, if you really had to pee, you wouldn't say, well, I have to love myself more. So I've got this incredible urge to pee. You would say, no, I have an urge to pee. I need to respect it, but I'll respect it at the proper place and time. Otherwise, they don't let you in restaurants. Right? So this part of the brain, the upper part of us, has the ability to inhibit virtually any impulse, And it's more of a domination than nurturing your inner child back to health. So it's kind of like when there's a challenger in a wolf pack and the alpha wolf has to put the challenger back in line. It snarls at it and it says, get back in line or I'll kill you. You know, it's not a, oh, poor baby, you must be feeling sad, you have all these needs. I'm all in favor of people taking care of their authentic needs. And look, I'm a compassionate guy. If you need a hug, I'll give you a hug, right? But it just didn't work. It just didn't work. And the more I tried to love myself thin, the worse it got. And I ran across some alternative addiction treatment literature. I was coming out of Overeaters Anonymous at the time. I was about 42, I think. And I ran across this literature that was essentially saying this for drugs and alcohol. And it said that it was Jack Trimpey at Rational Recovery for people who are interested in that. And my system doesn't work for drugs and alcohol, by the way. So if you have a drug and alcohol problem, please use.
I was going to ask about that, actually, funnily enough. I was interested.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you why later. But,
okay, yeah, it's cool.
But his system does. And he basically said that you have to draw a very clear and very bright line. He says, I'll never drink again. And that when you draw that very clear and bright line, then you can hear all the thoughts, impulses, images, and feelings that are generated by the lizard brain in an effort to overwhelm the brain and take control. And so you just start to say, well, I will never do that again. I don't have to listen to this animal because I'm the superior human being. I'm the alpha wolf. I'm in charge. So here's what I did. There was something else going on I want to say in a minute, but what I did was I said, this is embarrassing because I'm a sophisticated psychologist. I've done millions of dollars of consulting. This is how I overcame it. said, this thing here is my pig. This is my inner pig. I'm going to draw a really clear line in the sand, like I will never have chocolate Monday to Friday again, or I will only ever eat bread in a restaurant again. And that way, if I heard my pig squealing, if it said something that suggested I should have chocolate, I would know that that's not me, that's my pig. And I would say, well, I don't eat pig slop and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. That's how I got over overeating. The reason it wasn't a miracle, it just started to work slowly but surely. It kind of gave me those extra microseconds at the moment of impulse to make the right decision. But it did radically alter my perception of my relationship with food. Suddenly, this myth of powerlessness disappeared. I no longer believe the disease model. I no longer believe that I should blame my ancestors. I no longer believe that it was impossible to quit and that I could only abstain one day at a time. I suddenly recognized that I did have the power and that I just had to work on this by creating the right rules, making sure that I actually had that conversation when I heard the pig squealing for a while, kind of like you pay attention to the rules of the road when you learn how to drive, but then after a while you don't have to pay attention anymore. And that's how I recovered. The other thing that was going on that really put this in place for me was I'd done all this consulting for the big food companies, and I recognized that they were spending billions of dollars to engineer these food-like substances. And these are hyper palatable concentrations of salt and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins that are packaged up in a small space, the most calories and the most flavor and bliss stimulating sensation they could create for a reasonable amount of money. And then billions of dollars more went into packaging to make you think that you really needed it and that it was really healthy for you. And then billions of dollars went into advertising. There are about 7,000 messages a year beamed at us about food. Maybe a half dozen of them are about whole fruits and vegetables, right? So we're being constantly programmed to eat this stuff. I remember talking to an advertising executive in a major food bar manufacturer that was doing really well. And he said, I'll tell you a secret. The reason we're doing so well is we took the vitamins out of the bar because they were interfering with the taste, and we put the money into the packaging instead to make it look healthy. So he sat there and he told me, we're faking you out, right? We're not giving you the nutrition to make you feel satisfied. We're making you think that the nutrition is there. That's perfectly legal. It goes on all the time. And I started to feel, rather than feeling ashamed of my inability to stop or my supposed inability to stop, I started to feel angry. I started to, remember the movie Network where the guy says, I want you to go to your window, open the window and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I started to feel like that. I started to feel like I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I wanted to opt out. So I just started experimenting with rules. I came up with things that I would always do. I came up with things that I would never do again. Eventually, I decided I was never going to have chocolate because it was just too hard to control it. And I came up with things that I would do under certain conditions. And I was very, very clear about the rules. I developed this little system, and slowly but surely I lost, 55, 60 pounds. It depends upon when you weigh me. And my triglycerides came down, and I started eating a lot less of the industrial foods. I was no longer looking for love in bags and boxes and containers. Now I was looking for it more in the whole fruits and vegetables and other natural foods that were available. And it got easier and easier. And not that I was ever 100% perfect, but I never felt powerless. I never felt like I didn't have control anymore. If I made a mistake, I knew that I was still in control. I knew I could, in the middle of a mistake, I knew that I could stop anytime. So I would have 5 cupcakes instead of 15, or my binge would be 5,000 calories instead of 15,000 calories. And it just got slowly better because as I realized that I was in control, it just seemed silly to eat the wrong thing because I could change the food plan whenever I want to. Nobody was telling me what these rules should be. I could change it whenever I wanted to. And I knew that I was the one that was letting the pig out of its cage. I could always put it back. And that's how I recovered. It was not dramatic. It was not incredibly scientific. It was fairly crude and primitive. After 30 years of being a sophisticated psychologist and publishing articles and getting on the airwaves to talk about all these scientific things, I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. That's what got me better.
Oh wow, yeah, that's very interesting because I mean, myself, for example, I am when also I was a kid, I was very very overweight, and then when I started going through college, high school for Americans, so I was like 16ish. That was when I started to kind of try and take more of a grasp of my own health and things. I started to exercise a little bit more and that sort of thing. And then it was only about 2 years ago or so, maybe three. I dated someone. She was a bigger girl. She had issues of eating and controlling what she could eat and all this impulsiveness. And then after we split, I ended up kind of putting my foot down and being like, I'm gonna really try at this. I'm gonna make sure I lose the weight, all these sort of things. And what I found is over the last year, especially, where I've been a lot more about my own, it's no one else. I'm not doing it for anyone else. I'm just doing it for me. So it's like, I want to do this. I want to feel better about myself. I want to do these things. And then, yeah, if you do have like a moment of weakness and you fall off the wagon, as it were, you can just get back on it. You can do these things. And what I found happened is that with my relationship with food, even though obviously I love eating chocolate bars and all that sort of thing, and it's great to well putting chocolate in your mouth tastes great. But what I found is when I eat it less often, it becomes more of a treat.
Yeah,
Where it's just like instead of it being like, oh, every day I get in from work and I eat a chocolate bar, great. It's more, okay, once a week, I let myself have the one and you savor it more. And it's a healthier balance. What I say about pretty much everything in life is about moderation. So I want to ask you about we said at the always, never, conditional. So what give us there are some examples of these. I assume like always sort of like healthy greens for yours, the never is chocolate. So what are some of the more examples of that?
I will only ever have pretzels again in a Major League Baseball park. I never eat standing up. I always put my fork down between bites. You can make rules that just support mindfulness. You don't have to make rules that restrict anything. And you have to be careful, by the way, when you make restrictive rules that they're not too restrictive. That they're the addiction to overeating is really an addiction to the feast and famine cycle. And if you keep yourself in famine for too long, if you lose weight too quickly, if you give your body the perception that calories and nutrition are not available for too long, then when they are available, your body's going to want to force you to be less discriminating and hoard. That's why for so many people being full is a signal to eat more. It's because there seems to be some evolutionary mechanism that says, look, we're going to starve if we don't hoard everything we can right now. So now that there's food available, let's get it all in. That seems to be what that's about.
Yeah, from that hunter gatherer sort of things, I imagine
Yeah.
back when food wasn't you can just walk down the corner shop and get unlimited food. It was you have to go out and hunt, so it made more sense for that sort of thing. And our evolution hasn't quite caught up with our progress as a society.
Not even close.
No,
Not even close.
wow, go on
Now,
then.
now you're correct that you will experience more pleasure from the treats if you have them once in a while. Not everybody can do that. For some people, never is easier than sometimes. But for probably more than half of the people that I work with most of the things they struggle with, it's just as well to try to have it conditionally and define very specifically what those conditions are. Like, I will only have chocolate on the weekends at a restaurant, or I'll only have it in a social event, and no more than 2 ounces at a time, or something like that. It's like if you're shooting for a bullseye on an archery target, and you might not want to shoot for the exact bullseye sometime, but you still know where the parameters are of the rung around it. You don't just shoot it up in the air because you're not shooting for the bullseye. And that eliminates decision making, and it turns out the decision making is what wears down our willpower. And so a lot of times when people felt like they couldn't control themselves in a particular situation, if they decide, well, we're going to Thanksgiving now, right? And to say, well, I will have one plate of whatever food I want to at Thanksgiving and that's it. Now they made all their decisions. They're not going to walk into the environment subject to all the smells and social pressures and have to make decisions on the spur of the moment. And they find that they're able to do that. What I was saying was a treat tastes better when you have it once in a while because of the phenomenon in the nervous system called downregulation and upregulation. When your nervous system is presented with a supersized stimulus, we had no chocolate bars in the savannah. It didn't exist. Just like we didn't have subways. And I remember I lived underneath a subway in graduate school. And the first week I had no idea how I was going to sleep because it was so noisy and came by, 20 times a night. Then about 2 weeks later, I didn't hear it at all. But what happened, my brain said, that supersized stimulus is not relevant. You don't have to pay attention to it. It's not dangerous. It doesn't provide any sustenance. It's not relevant. So let me downregulate the response. That happens with your taste buds. There are no chocolate bars in the savannah. It's a concentrated form of sugar and fat and theobromine and caffeine and all types of other stimulants. And so when you eat that every day, your taste buds will downregulate. And you will not experience the same pleasure as you did the first time you ate it. You certainly won't experience the same pleasure that you're supposed to experience when you eat an apple. However, and so your pig will tell you, you can't change this. You can't give it up, or you can't start having it once a week if you were having it every day, because you're going to be tortured forever. As a matter of fact, I talk to a lot of people who say that they need sugar just to feel normal. That's the extreme of downregulation. People start to feel depressed in its absence rather than pleasure in its presence. However, the research suggests that I think it's within 6 to 8 weeks, your taste buds will double in sensitivity if you let go of a lot of this hyperstimulation. So the phenomenon of upregulation comes into play. If you're having chocolate once a week, then you're not downregulating 6 days a week, you're only downregulating 1 day a week, and you're upregulating 6 days a week. You get back to a higher level, and so the experience of the chocolate is much, much deeper. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you for coming that. That's fine. Yeah, no problem at all. Out of interest, obviously, I do want to continue speaking about this and more into your book, and there's a few other things as well. But just as a little sort of tangent in a way, what's your opinion when it comes to exercise and diet? Like, what do you think is, maybe if it's a percentage or something like that, which one is more important? Like, obviously, you mentioned earlier about the whole something bulimia. I can't remember exactly what you said, where you eat loads.
Exercise bulimia.
There you go. Yeah. And so, like, you eat loads and loads and loads, and then you're like, great, I can just burn this off by exercising loads. And then obviously, if you spend so much more time exercising just to deal with your essentially addiction, it's not healthy for your lifestyle. So what place does exercise have among this sort of reprogramming?
First of all, I have a hard time getting my clients to exercise. I seem to attract people who don't like to, but partially it's because they're often very overweight and it's uncomfortable to get started. What I do know about exercise, I'm not a medical doctor and I'm not a nutritionist or anything. So this is just from a psychologist who's read a lot about it and has exercised a lot himself. It is influential in helping you lose weight, but it's a small part of the variance. So it's kind of more for the long term than the short term. And it's a lot easier to lose weight in the short term by altering your diet. Most workouts you do for an hour in the gym are not going to burn a lot more than 500 or 600 calories. So it's easier to get 500 calories out of your diet than it is to exercise. That said, there are so many other benefits to exercise: the regulation of your hormones, better sleep, improving of your long-term metabolism. There are so many benefits to exercise that I really think that it should be part of everyone's life. We were meant to move. We were not born to lay around in the sun. We were meant to move. Rest is actually a scarce commodity in nature. So I remember being in, I think it was Newport, Oregon, on the beach, and there was a dock, and there were about 40 seals fighting for a space on a dock with about 30 places they could rest. And what I was really struck with was how much the seals had to work to knock each other off the dock and get that opportunity to rest. So I think that that's what life in nature is largely about. It's fighting for the opportunity to rest, not resting for the opportunity to fight. And so I believe that's how we evolve. That's what our machinery is designed to propel us forward to do. But in our society, we have remote controls and sofas and shelter and McDonald's in every street corner, and rest is abundant. And so I think we are binging on rest in the same way that we're binging on fast food. And I think that's a problem. So I also think it could be a problem to exercise 3 hours a day, but half hour a day, several times a week, I think most people could do that.
Yeah, it is that sort of thing of trying to moderate things and trying to have like a healthy balance of everything, really. How much, I know you mentioned earlier about obviously advertising and all those sorts of things. Like over obviously you've been in marketing and that sort of thing for a number of years. I think I saw it was around 25 years. Was that around the time? Or was that?
Yeah, a lifetime. A lifetime. Yeah. More like 30. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So it's like, how over the last few years, or couple of decades, have you seen like a big change in the way marketing is done, especially with food and fast food? Because obviously there's a surge in fast food. You've got these apps now where you can get people just to deliver straight to your house and things like that. And obviously fast food, has that phenomena kind of been accelerating and getting worse quite quickly, or has it been kind of a constant? What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Well, I think the food itself has become supersized at an alarming rate. And I think the portions of sugar and fat and salt and oil and excitotoxins that we're having are higher and more dangerous than they've ever been. And I think that the messaging around that has become more effective than people realize that it is. Most people think advertising doesn't affect them, but advertising affects you more if your sales resistance is down. And so thinking that it doesn't affect you is exactly where the advertising industry wants you to be. So I think that has accelerated at an alarming rate. I think that the ability for the company to engineer your bliss point without giving you the nutrition to feel satisfied has accelerated at an alarming rate. And the advertising feedback mechanisms, I mean, privacy is dead. Privacy is just, it's been dead in this country for 10 years. And in the advertising industry, we have this saying, when I used to own a digital advertising agency, and we'd say, don't be creepy. So we have the capacity now when you visit a website to follow you around to every other website that you visit and keep advertising to you about the thing that you visited. So let's say a guy goes to a website about erectile dysfunction, and then he goes to visit the National Basketball Association's league, and he sees a great ad about erectile dysfunction, and then he goes to watch an ad about a Disney movie, and he sees this great ad about erectile dysfunction. That's creepy, and that they're doing it with food also. So you visit a site to buy chocolate, then you're going to get followed around with people that know that you like chocolate, and you can't really get away from it unless you make a serious effort to opt out. So, yeah, but I think it's hopeless to fight that. I think there are some things legislatively we can do, and there's some actions that have already been taken. I don't think we can fight that. I don't think we can avoid the stimulation. I think that the defense is a good offense. I think that we need to step back and think through, what does healthy food mean for us specifically? So rather than debate about whether chocolate is healthy or not, what role do you want chocolate to play in your life? What amount of chocolate do you think is healthy? What type of chocolate do you think is healthy? At what times? In what quantities? And draw the line very carefully so that it's objective. I find that our reptilian brains, our inner pigs, our inner food monsters, they barrel through any ambiguity at the speed of light. So make a really objective line so that it's really easy to distinguish healthy behavior from unhealthy behavior, which means it'll be really easy to distinguish that destructive fat thinking voice from your healthy thin thinking voice.
I see. Okay. In keeping the same sort of line of this, are you hopeful for the future? I mean, from my experience the last few years, where I've been listening to podcasts a lot more and that sort of thing, I've not only noticed that in England, there's been a lot more gyms that have been popping up, like especially ones that open 24 hours a day. And there's a place that opened up recently near me called Fit Chef, and it's a takeaway place, but they only do healthy food, which is a very interesting thing. And I hadn't even thought about that. But do you think we're in sort of the worst of it at the moment, but people are now starting to realize the dangers of it? I know there's a lot of new diets coming in. I know there's always been kind of fad diets for a while, but like the ketogenic diet is a big one. Some people going for the carnivore diet. There's a lot more people realizing, I think potentially from the film Super Size Me. I know that came out quite a while ago, but I think that was one of the first times that people kind of went, oh, I didn't quite realize how bad fast food was for you. Not saying
Yeah.
everything in that film is obviously perfect, but it's that sort of thing of kind of just turning people's heads a little bit away to make them kind of think that. So do you think people are getting better? Do you think kind of like there are a percentage of people who are getting better and then another percentage of people getting worse, and it's just kind of dividing more?
I think there is an awareness, a burgeoning awareness of what healthy versus unhealthy is. I think that it's kind of like the trajectory of smoking. People smoke a lot less than they did 50 years ago, but it moves at a snail's pace. So there's the organic movement, there's the whole foods plant-based movement, there's the exercise movement, and it's all moving along But I think that until the older generation in power starts to step aside, and unfortunately, see, it's not just that industry lies to us, it's that the populace wants to be lied to. And people want to believe that things that are not healthy for them are healthy for them. You know, it's like a potato chip infused with omega-3 oil. Well, yeah, it's infused with omega-3 oil, and maybe that's helpful for you, but it's also got acrylamides and other carcinogenic substances from the roasting process. And so it's a little healthier for you, but you're kind of lying to yourself because you're taking all this carcinogenic stuff. And which is not to say that people can't eat a few potato chips if they want to have a few potato chips, but I think that people want to be lied to. They don't really want to know what is healthy and what's not healthy because these foods are so addictive and they're so gratifying that people don't want to give it up. Then you add to the fact that people are so stressed these days. They're overwhelmed with the need for information and decision and the stimulus coming at them, not just food stimulus, but look at the number of scene changes in situation comedies these days. And if you look at the graphs of those scene changes compared to 20 years ago, you'll see that it's accelerating, accelerating, accelerating. Look at how loud the movies are. Look at all the action and explosions and, naked women and everything that we're stimulated with. Not that there's anything wrong with naked women, but where we wouldn't have had that stimulation on the savannah. It would be rare that you ran across an explosion or a naked woman on the savannah. It wouldn't happen that often. And so we are getting, our senses are much more impinged and frustrated, and there's a sense of stress and dysphoria. And so the pig's rationalization that, well, the only pleasure in life is this muffin or this potato chip or, this pornography or whatever the short-term gratification happens to be, that becomes more and more appealing. And so I think people are engaged in a more and more addictive process. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I was going to say with your book, obviously, you mentioned how you kind of lost the weight and that sort of thing. But when you came to writing the book, had you been thinking about that for quite a while, and it kind of just you wrote it because it was the right time, or was it kind of a moment of clarity where you just decided, no, I'm gonna write this book. I want to tell people what to do.
I was never going to publish this book. This was my journal. Are you kidding? I'm a sophisticated I'm a sophisticated psychologist. I'm nationally known. I'm out there, with credentials, and this was a secret way that I fixed the problem myself. You think I wanted to get up as a doctor and say, well, I got this pig inside me, see, and I don't eat pig slop, and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. So no, what happened when I wrote the book? It was in 2015. I'd been keeping a journal for about 8 years, and I was getting divorced, and I needed something to do for a little while because I was going to be closing down a lot of my other stuff. And I was a minor partner in a publishing company, and the CEO of that company said, we really need to publish a book ourselves. We're trying to teach people how to market on the Kindle, and we know how to do it, but they won't do it, so we need to do it ourselves and prove it. And I told him about this journal. I let him read it, and he said, you got to do this, dude. He says, you have to publish this. And I said, you're crazy. I'm not getting out in there and talking about a pig inside of me. But he said, no, you got to do it. And it's 3 years later, and we've got 600,000 readers and got a whole business based on it. So I guess it resonates with some people. I guess it helps some people.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing to hear, especially. And you mentioned, I'm just trying to think with like the Kindle and things like that, and the sort of the internet. It might be a good time now just to kind of do the subtle plug of your website, which we can do it again at the end. But
Okay.
on your website, I'll let you go ahead with it.
Shameless self-promotion, is that what you're saying?
Yep, go ahead. Yeah.
It's actually not just self-promotion because we give an awful lot away for free, including the book itself. So if you go to neverbingeagain.com and you click on the big red button and sign up for the free reader bonuses, you'll not only get a copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format, but we've set up some food plan starter templates, which are sets of rules that could be appropriate to start with for any given dietary philosophy. So whether you're low carb or ketogenic or macrobiotic or high carb or point counters or calorie counters, there's a plan for you. The last thing that you get there, it's not the last thing, but the last important thing you get is a set of recorded free coaching sessions because I know that this is really weird in theory. I know this sounds really harsh in theory, but it's not harsh in practice. It's actually very compassionate in practice. And I wanted you to hear what it was like to have someone come in feeling despairing and powerless and having no enthusiasm, and to really turn around in one session and feel their excitement that they could actually do this. So neverbingeagain.com, click on the big red free bonus button.
Cool. Awesome. I just thought I'd plug that while we start talking about the book and things.
Thank you.
And no problem. I will do it again at the end, and I'll include the usual links in the description and stuff. But out of interest, have you had much criticism from this book? Because obviously you're saying with your standing being sort of, a nationally known psychologist, obviously a lot of people probably went to you and gone, "This isn't your field. Why are you talking in this field?" Or disagree with what you were saying. Did you have much pushback, much criticism?
Well, I mean, psychologists do work in eating disorders. I just had never done it because I had a problem. I haven't had that particular criticism. And it turns out, I didn't know this at the time, but it turns, because I publish this as pure information and education. I don't publish this as a treatment at all. We are going to work on getting clinical trials and try to get it up to scientific standards. But it's not at this point. It's really just education. And it's what worked for me. And if you want to try it, you're welcome to try it for yourself. So I didn't know that the evidence in psychology, the scientific evidence, was starting to lean towards cognitive behavioral interventions for binge eating, plus using some SSRI medications, but mostly cognitive behavioral interventions. And I wound up being contacted by a psychologist who was trying to spread the word, because if you talk to most therapists, you usually get people leaning towards what you'd call intuitive eating, which says that it's unhealthy to draw a distinction between healthy and unhealthy food. They would say you have to be able to eat everything in moderation, and that the phenomenon of restricting it all is what causes binging, because people get carried away with it and then they rebel against themselves. I think there's a valid point to the idea that some people do better with an intuitive eating approach. So I don't want to say this is the only way to get better in any way, shape, or form. A lot of people don't. I think that when we live in a society where there's flavored cardboard in the food system, literally. I could show you companies that have gotten permission to put cardboard into our food and flavor it well enough that we don't notice it. If there's flavored cardboard in the food system, don't you have to at some point stand up and say, this is healthy food and this isn't healthy food? Mm-hmm. And we all have some rules. I mean, we don't eat dirt and rocks. We don't eat dog poop. We all have things that we will and won't do with food. I'm just arguing that we should articulate it. The last criticism that I get constantly is that people think that it's harsh to call yourself a pig. And there's two things I don't understand. First of all, I called my reptilian brain a pig. You don't have to call your reptilian brain a pig. You can call it your junkyard dog or your food demon or whatever you want to call it. Just not a cute animal. Just not a cute pet you want to take care of. This is something you're going to dominate. The other thing is that this is no more you than your bladder is you. This is an organ inside of you it generates a very powerful biological urge, but that urge needs to be sublimated and controlled. Just like your bladder. If you have to go number one in your mother-in-law's living room, you tell your bladder to hold on. We're going to go find an appropriate place to do that. I made enough pee jokes. I'm sorry.
There's never too many. You can keep on going.
Never too many pee jokes?
Well, we'll see. Maybe if there's one every minute, that'd be too much. But at the moment, you're fine.
do you know about the Yellow River by IP Daily?
No.
It's never mind. You got to think about that one.
Okay.
Your audience will get it. So now I forgot where I was because I made a stupid pee joke.
Yeah, we were talking about the pig, like people, the criticisms of saying don't call yourself a pig. When it's not you, it's a part of you.
And what actually happens, so people are afraid they're going to feel worse about themselves and beat themselves up more. What actually happens as a part of this process is you wind up forgiving yourself more quickly, and you feel better about yourself in time because you gain control over something you felt out of control with. And so the shame actually tends to dissipate. And I tell people there's a purpose to shame and guilt. There's a purpose, just like there's a purpose to physical pain. There's a disorder in our society which has some children born without the ability to feel pain. And those kids don't live past 5 or 6 years old. It's very difficult to keep them alive because they run into things, they use knives. It's very, very difficult. Similarly, because you need pain to pay attention to what you're doing to hurt yourself. Similarly, shame and guilt are the psychological equivalents of feeling shame and guilt, of feeling physiological pain, and they're intended to draw your attention to something. Once you've paid attention to it, in this case, let's say you make a mistake and you break your best laid plans, that's what you want to do is figure out, was it a tricky pig squeal that got me to overeat, to break my plan, or was it something that was wrong with the target in and of itself? Do I need to change where the target is and change my food rules? And what would I do differently next time? If you've figured that out, you need to let go of the shame and guilt, because the purpose of excessive shame and guilt is actually binge motivated. The pig is trying to get you to feel too weak to resist the next binge. That's a piercing insight. It's very difficult to keep on overeating if you refuse to keep yelling at yourself. And if there's nothing people took away from this interview, that's it. So I tell people to commit with perfection, but forgive themselves with dignity.
And linking onto that, what is your opinion in general of fat shaming? Like, I'm not saying, go down the street and attack everyone, but we're in this society now, which, there's a lot of bigger women who are doing, say, modeling and things like that, which I'm for and I'm happy with. But there's this weird sort of thing where a lot of people won't want to critique someone from being overweight. And I don't really know where I stand on that, because, being with friends and family who are overweight and have been called as such, it's obviously very unpleasant to have that. But there's the other side of the argument, which is, if you're shamed in a sense, it makes you more want to work on yourself. I just wonder what your opinions are on that, and the kind of society of, if I say air quotes, coddling in a sense.
Well,
Where's the
I
line
don't
in a sense?
I don't think that anybody should be shamed for anything unless they are consciously and purposely doing something to hurt someone else. That's what I think the real purpose of deep shame is. If you're consciously and purposely trying to hurt someone else, then shame on you. But I think that shaming people for being fat is counterproductive. And if you look at most formerly obese people's faces, including my own, you can still see some of the shame that they carried on it. That said, I also think that it's a mistake to assume that every weight is a healthy weight. And I don't think we should support people to maintain something that is going to result in diabetes or heart attacks or cancer or all sorts of other ailments. I don't think that in the name of acceptance and love, we should support them to stay there. I think that we can help them to feel good about themselves as they are addressing the issue. I think that everyone deserves love, but I also think that it's possible to take that too far and mistakenly support people to self-destruct, and I don't believe in that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so with this, let's say the eating issues that you've had, would you class that under addiction? Would you say that this is what you're trying to teach with the book is kind of curbing or guiding to help an addiction, or do you think that eating is not in the same sort of field as the standard examples of cigarettes or drugs and alcohol?
Well, the question presupposes that there's another world that we fall into with drugs or alcohol, where we no longer have control of our hands or our mouth or our legs or our tongue or the ability to put things in them. And I don't see the evidence for that. There's virtually zero evidence for these addictions being a disease. A disease is something that's contagious. A disease is not cured by simply isolating someone. If you take an alcoholic and put them in a cell, they're cured. They can't get alcohol, right? So I don't really believe in the disease concept. I think that the neurological changes that they're showing are the results of the behavior, but not the cause of the behavior. So people that drink a lot of alcohol will show a change in their dopaminergic and glutamate pleasure systems, and they will show a different area of the brain that lights up in response to the stimuli. But people who drive taxis will also show those changes if you put a taxi in front of them. Does that mean that they're a compulsive taxi driver or that they have a taxi driving disease? I don't think so. So do I believe that the phenomenon of neuroplasticity, that things that fire together, wire together, that if you teach your brain that this is where the reward is and you give it a super stimulus, do I believe that that becomes harder to avoid doing as time goes on and the more you do it? I absolutely do. And I also believe that we have the power to quit any of that on our own with very minimal symptoms. A lot of the, the detoxing and the horrific thing people are afraid of with heroin and stuff, it's not quite as serious as everybody thinks that it is. If you're going to go through that, and I recommend that you talk to your doctor and see what the appropriate protocol would be to make sure that you're safe. But it's nowhere near as horrific as everybody thinks that it is. So when you're asking me, do I think that food is as addictive as heroin? I think it can be. I think it can be, but I don't think that heroin is as impossible to get off of as everybody thinks that it is. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we're linking onto that as well. You said earlier in the podcast when we kind of touched on it about this method wouldn't necessarily work for drug abuse, for example. Why is that, or why do you think that is, or what's the sort of difference here?
The reason for it is the reason that I really had to create Never Binge Again in the first place is that it's not morally reprehensible to eat a box of donuts. I mean, you could argue that you're harming your health and you're the head of a family and you might leave your kids too early or something like that. But it's not like knowing that if you take one drink, you're going to wind up behind the wheel of a car and could maim or kill somebody. That's morally reprehensible. And so as a consequence, especially with food where you have to eat 3 or 4 times a day, you have to create a system where you can forgive yourself for mistakes. Whereas if you're really an alcoholic, it's better if you quit alcohol today and avoid it like cyanide for the rest of your life. And it is something to feel guilty about if you have a sip. It is something to feel guilty about. So the softness of this system, this system is way too forgiving to be applied to drugs or alcohol. So that's what, and also Jack Trimpe at Rational Recovery has been working with drugs and alcohol for like 25 years. And I was never an alcoholic. I quit drinking when I was 22 years old, and I just haven't had a sip. I didn't go to a program. I just decided I didn't like it. It made me depressed. I quit. I don't have that experience. I don't have the experience of an alcoholic, so I don't relate to it in the same way. And I'd much rather people worked with him for drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, and also obviously food's got that slightly different dynamic, especially where you need to eat food to live. So
Yeah.
whereas you don't need to do heroin to live, so I can understand why that is slightly different. Out of interest, what were you doing sort of before this book came out? Like obviously you said you're sort of nationally known. What specifics do you study in psychology which weren't specifically to do with food?
Well, I was doing more in business at that time than I was in psychology, but I was running a coach training organization. And we were advertising aggressively, and we were, always on the first page of Google, and we put about 400 people through an intensive training to teach them how to be business and personal coaches. That was my main focus before I got divorced and closed that down and worked on Never Binge Again. We still train coaches, but we only train people in this particular method. So we train people who want to help others lose weight and stop overeating.
Oh, that's cool. So we're getting near sort of end of your time, so I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak to me and things.
This is fun.
It's great. It's great. Let's say 10 years, what would be the ideal in 10 years for you and for sort of, let's call it the Never Binge Again movement? I know that you mentioned obviously on your website, which we'll put links to and whatnot, there's food plans and other sort of media content on there. What do you want to do in the next 10 years, and what would you hope to see?
I want to help 1 million people a year to stop binge eating. And I want to know that that's a legacy that keeps going. That's the most important thing to me. Tactically, I would like there to be, the ultimate app that, I'm not supposed to say too much about that, but I would like to see the ultimate app to help people really engage in this in a fun way and in a very motivating way, and that where they have an index of information available to them to beat any rationalization or squeal or craving that they might have, and to do it in a social way to recruit others on a quest. I'd like to see that. I would like to see long-term clinical trials prove themselves to get people off of diabetes medication and prevent heart attacks and strokes, and I'd like to save some lives. And I would like to see a few hundred highly qualified, active Never Binge Again coaches helping people around the world to those 1 million people, helping those 1 million people to stop. That's That's my vision. Also, I would like to see, like Steve Martin said, death penalty for parking violations, especially in New York City. As long as I'm going to be king of the world, those are the things I want to do.
Okay, that's fine. So, we won't have any more obesity, but also punishment by death only on market violations. That's good.
Yeah.
Interesting
Yeah.
way. Yeah, of interest also, with the internet, what do you think that has, what part that's played? Do you think that's been more helpful for people finding this information through, obviously, your website or the podcasts and the plethora of sort of media content there is online? Or do you think that there's a lot of stuff online which is making it worse? Or do you think, once again, it's one of those things where the internet is just the internet. It's kind of good and bad.
I think the internet is not a business. It's a catalyst for your business, and it could be used for good or evil. I would not be where I am without the internet. I mean, Amazon.com has been enormous for us. We've been between number 1 and number 3 most days for eating disorders and weight loss and weight maintenance for over 2 years. So we just, we have 600,000 readers because, not only because of Amazon.com, but Amazon.com combined with publicity. So I couldn't have done it without the internet, and the internet allows the Kindle book to link back to our site and give people all those free bonuses so that we can then talk to them, and we can provide the coaching that makes it into a business, which makes us able to advertise more. So I couldn't exist in the way that we exist today without the internet, but neither could a lot of the fast food companies and profiteers that are targeting your lizard brain. They couldn't be as powerful as they are either. So, I don't think we can blame the media. I think we need to work on our missions and goals and using the media that exists to promote pro-social medias and goals, pro-social goals and dreams as opposed to anti-social goals and dreams. And Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And democracy does not really protect us from capitalistic greed and harming the public's health in the pursuit of short-term gratification and long-term profit. So we have to protect ourselves. And that's my conclusion. I would fight for the country's right and the vendor's rights to sell whatever is legal, because I think that that's a freedom that we fought wars for. By the same token, I think that we really need to understand what they're selling us, and caveat emptor, buyer beware, make an informed decision, and move forward in that regards. So
Yeah,
that's what I got. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about like a responsible absorption of media in a sense. It's you could try and put all these checks and balances on a lot of the big companies and things, which could end up harming other companies in other ways. But if you teach the public to review their own cognition as well as how they're absorbing content, that would curb the problem probably easier and better for everyone than trying to force these companies to have restrictions on them and things. So I think that comes together well. I think I've got just one more question for you. Really, and that was with obviously why binge again? Why binge again? Never binge again.
Yeah, why that's my next book. Why binge again? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Would you consider writing books about either any other subjects that are nothing to do with eating, or would it be? I'm thinking of like the opposite side of the spectrum. So, for example, people who have got eating disorders such as anorexia who aren't eating at all. Have you put any thought or considerations into doing something similar that you're kind of doing with the, Never Binge Again movement with the kind of opposite side, or?
So those are two separate questions.
Sorry, yeah.
One is with the more severe eating disorders like bulimia and anorexia. I was never bulimic, I was never anorexic, and I didn't treat a lot of people as a psychologist in that way. So I lack an in-depth understanding of that. That having been said, I can tell you that there do seem to be a lot of bulimics that use it and seem to be using it successfully. There are not a lot of anorexics that are using it successfully. Those are both very dangerous disorders. And so if you have that, you really need to get your doctor's permission before you're supposed to get your doctor's permission if you have any eating disorder diagnosis whatsoever, but especially for anorexia and bulimia, make sure that it's okay with your doctor that you're doing this. I don't think it helps for anorexia. I think it actually could foster anorexia if someone runs away with it the wrong way. I do think it might help for bulimia. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Mike, I'm supposed to be on another call, unfortunately.
That's fine. I was going to say we're coming to the hour mark now, so I was going to say you've been very generous with your time. Obviously, I'll put all the links to the standard of in the description and whatnot. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for all your time, Glenn, and hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
Okay, namaste. I'll see you next time.
See you later,
Okay.
man. And that's the end of the podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. I'll be sure to put a link in the description for Never Binge Again, so be sure to check that out if you want to get a free book and sort of everything that Dr. Glenn was sort of talking about. You can get more information on and all that sort of thing. Coming up in the following weeks, I've still got the two-parter saved with Junior of the We the Lifers clothing brand / other stuff. Get more into details of that when we release the episode. I've got a sort of one-off episode I've done with my friend TJ. We kind of ramble off about nothing in particular, so that's a bit of a fun one. I've got one that was planned with her in a couple of weeks that may be a Christmas one, so we'll see about that. Maybe I'll release those two together. And I do have a Skype podcast planned for tomorrow, because I'm recording this on the Sunday. I believe that they're still coming through. I've emailed them just to double check. So hopefully I get a response from them soon. That's a gentleman called Tom King. I'll give more details about that later on. I don't want to put too many details if it ends up being rescheduled, as two of the other Skype podcasts I've done have ended up being rescheduled, which is not a problem at all. But I don't want to give loads of details and then nothing happen about it. So we'll see about that. I think I want to do another Science But Simple before Christmas, and I want to do another sort of gaming one with Reese and Josh. Then I'm going to have to start sort of planning some of the more other future ones. So I'm going to have to see what comes about there. See if I can get recorded before Christmas. But anyway, enough of me sort of rambling and whatnot. I think, to be honest, that's about it. Be sure to follow on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. This episode, even though you're at the end of it, was on YouTube with full video if you're interested in that. It's just me and Glenn chatting over Skype, so you get to see what I look like in full conversation and things in a not great quality camera. So, woo. Follow us on Instagram. It has a lot more sort of photos and a lot more posts. I post 30-second snippets on there, so you can check out episodes if you sort of are a bit unsure about the subject matter. You can just kind of have a little taster of that. I do movie reviews as well, which I sometimes post on Twitter, but I also post on Facebook and Instagram, just mini movie review, like 1 or 2 paragraphs with a rating out of 100. I do things what I'm sort of up to. Sometimes I'll go see a band live or see just something that's cool, like a statue somewhere or museum or whatever. I post about that. So, if your Instagram's normally, I'd say, the best way, check us out on Instagram. I think that's about it, really. Be sure to review us on iTunes. I know that all podcasters ask that, but we're quite a small podcast, so the more people who review us on iTunes, it kind of helps more people sort of see us. So that's quite a good thing to do as well. I think that's about it for now, really, guys. And I'm very tired, so I'm going to be going to bed soon. So thanks as always for tuning in, and I'll talk to you all next week.